All right, so today we're diving into the world of Robert Greene.
Oh, yeah, Robert Greene.
He's got some really interesting thoughts on purpose and power dynamics, even seduction.
He's got a knack for like connecting those dots between ideas you wouldn't think go together.
Exactly, and it really makes you re-examine things.
Hmm.
So Greene talks about this idea of finding your life's task.
Right, your purpose.
Yeah, and he says the key is to tap into those like impulse voices we had as kids.
Totally. Like before the world told us what we should be interested in.
Yes, exactly. Like remember when you were a kid? What were you just naturally drawn to?
Oh, so many things.
Me too. It's like those were clues.
Absolutely. Greene says it's not even just about the specific activities, but those underlying impulses. What got you really excited?
For him, it was words in early humans, which led him to like power dynamics and strategy.
Makes sense. How about you? What were those early signs? What fascinated you?
I've always been drawn to stories.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like from a young age, I was just captivated by books and movies.
That's so cool. See, even back then,
Yeah, I guess so.
it's like those early interests were pointing you towards something you'd really love.
It's true. And Greene talks about how as we get older, those external voices, they can drown out those passions.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Parents, teachers, even just like societal expectations.
It's like we lose touch with that inner compass.
Exactly. And Greene argues that we all have this inherent need for control over our environment.
Right.
So if you have a kid who loves to build, for example,
Okay.
and you keep telling them they're not good at it or push them towards something else,
It's not just about them missing out on a career path, right?
right, it's deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's that their need for agency gets stifled.
Makes sense.
And that can manifest in unhealthy ways later on.
So what happens when we reconnect with those passions? When we rediscover that inner compass?
Greene would say that's a great start, but it's not the whole picture. You also have to learn how to navigate the world.
And that means understanding power dynamics.
Exactly. Which I know that phrase can sound a little bit. But Greene isn't talking about being manipulative or anything. It's more about recognizing that everyone has a need for power.
It's like it's hardwired into us.
Exactly. The key is learning how to wield it effectively and ethically.
I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with the word power,
I get it. We're conditioned to think of it as a negative thing.
but Greene sees it differently. Right.
Totally. He'd say that ignoring power dynamics doesn't make them disappear.
In fact, it probably makes us more vulnerable.
Exactly. He wants us to become students of power. Observe it in action. Understand how it shapes our interactions.
So where do we even begin?
Self-awareness. Recognize those moments when you feel powerless or when you're trying to exert control over a situation.
Okay, so like,
And then ask yourself, what's really going on here? What are the unspoken dynamics at play?
this is already making me rethink some of my own relationships.
Right. It's powerful stuff. And here's where it gets even more interesting because Greene links this all to seduction.
Seduction. Okay, now you have to explain this one.
I know, right? That sounds a little out there,
Yeah.
but trust me on this one.
All right, I'm listening.
When Greene talks about seduction, he's not talking about some manipulative playbook.
Okay, good to know.
He's talking about vulnerability and connection, like in its purest form.
So go on.
It's about letting go of defenses, allowing yourself to be influenced by another person.
Whether it's a lover, a mentor, even a good book.
Exactly. That feeling of being totally engrossed, losing yourself in an idea or another person, that's the power of seduction at work.
I'm starting to see where you're going with this. So it's not about manipulation, but more about...
Influence. Think about the most influential figures in history.
Mm.
Greene would say many of them were masters of this kind of seduction.
Because they understood the power of vulnerability.
Yes,
Yeah.
letting people in, making them feel seen and heard.
He even argues that the art of seduction was in many ways developed by women.
He does, as a way to exert influence in a world where they often lacked traditional power.
And when you think about it historically, it makes a lot of sense.
It really does.
So instead of brute force or social status, this kind of power is about...
Charisma, empathy. The ability to forge genuine connection and trust.
like the leaders, artists, and thinkers we admire.
Exactly. Chances are they've mastered this subtle form of influence.
It makes you realize that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but actually...
A tremendous strength.
Yes. And Greene talks about this paradox where we're simultaneously drawn to vulnerability and terrified of it.
Right. It's scary.
It is. But think about it. The stories we find most compelling, the people we feel most connected to.
They often involve characters who let their guard down, right?
Exactly. They allow themselves to be changed by their experiences.
And in relationships, that vulnerability, it's essential for a deep and meaningful connection.
But it takes a certain level of confidence to be vulnerable.
It does. You have to trust that you can let someone in without being completely overwhelmed or losing yourself.
It's like that saying, you can't truly love someone until you've let them see your flaws.
Yes, it's so true.
But actually opening yourself up like that, it can feel incredibly risky.
It is risky. It's like exposing yourself.
So how do we find that balance? How do we know when to let our guard down and when to hold back?
That's where self-awareness comes in. Knowing yourself, your needs, your motivations.
So you can spot those red flags early on.
Exactly. Greene talks about these sublime experiences and how they can calibrate our internal compass.
Okay, sublime experiences. That sounds kind of new agey. Explain it to me.
Think about a moment in your life that just transcended the everyday. A breathtaking view, a piece of art that moved you deeply.
Or even just a moment of pure childlike wonder.
Exactly. Those are sublime experiences.
And those help us navigate vulnerability. How?
Because they remind us of what truly matters. They become our anchors. And here's where it gets interesting. Greene contrasts these with what he calls the false sublime.
False sublime. What's that then?
Things that give you a temporary escape, a quick hit of intensity, but ultimately leave you feeling empty.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So like addictions.
Exactly. Addiction to drugs, technology, even outrage.
So you're saying doom scrolling on social media, getting riled up by the comments. That's
The false sublime.
Mhm.
It distracts us from those deeper needs Greene's been talking about.
And keeps us from doing the real work.
Yes. The work of building genuine connections, cultivating those authentic experiences that nourish us.
Which is so hard in today's world. There's just so much noise.
Right. Information overload choices, distractions everywhere. It's tough to hear your own inner voice, let alone trust it.
Which brings us back to purpose, having that strong internal compass.
It's essential. Especially in a world with so many options, your sense of purpose becomes your filter.
It helps you cut through the crap and focus on what matters.
Exactly. It's about asking, does this opportunity, this relationship, this piece of information align with who I want to be?
That's such a powerful question. It makes you realize how much time we waste on things that don't really matter.
It's about being intentional. Choosing your mentors, your information, your experiences wisely.
Quality over quantity in all aspects of life. And speaking of growth, Greene talks about the importance of death ground.
Ah, yes, death ground. Sounds intense, right?
It does. In a good way, maybe, but definitely intense. Break it down for me.
So Greene uses this example of a mountain climber.
Okay.
And this climber found this incredible strength and focus when he was in a life or death situation.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't about seeking danger for the sake of it, but recognizing that sometimes those high-stakes situations...
They force you to dig deep.
Yes. They force you to tap into potential you didn't even know you had.
So it's about pushing your limits, getting comfortable with discomfort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you have to go climb a mountain.
Right. It could be something smaller, but still challenging.
For sure. Setting a deadline for a project, having a difficult conversation, even committing to a new habit.
So it's about creating those make or break moments for yourself, even in everyday life.
Yes. Don't wait for life to force your hand. Choose those death ground scenarios and embrace the growth that comes with them.
Because complacency can be its own form of death, right?
A slow fading of possibilities for sure.
And speaking of possibilities, Greene is a huge advocate for cultivating our own minds.
He is. He's always reminding us about the power of the human brain, its capacity for adaptation, learning, creativity.
Which is so important in this age of technology.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that AI is going to solve all our problems.
But Greene reminds us that we are the problem solvers.
Exactly. He's like, hey, that incredible thing inside your head, don't take it for granted. Don't let it atrophy.
It's about owning your potential, not outsourcing it to an algorithm.
Yes. And that's why he's such a proponent of lifelong learning.
True mastery requires you to never stop exploring, never stop pushing your boundaries.
And that can be challenging in a world that values efficiency and instant gratification.
So true. So how do we resist that? How do we cultivate that inner Robert Greene and not get seduced by the quick fix?
It starts with awareness. Paying attention to what lights you up. Those things you are naturally drawn to.
Those impulse voices.
Exactly. What sparked your curiosity as a kid? What made you lose track of time?
It's like he's saying those early interests weren't just random. They were clues.
They were. And then as you get older, Pay attention to how power dynamics are playing out in your life.
Am I giving my power away? Am I trying to control everything?
Right. It's about becoming a student of yourself as much as a student of the world.
So you can start making more conscious choices.
Choices that are aligned with your values and your purpose. That's how you start writing your own story.
And those stories, they might be messy. They might be unpredictable.
They might be, but they'll be authentically yours.
And maybe even a little bit dangerous.
As they should be. Remember, death ground.
Oh, yeah. Don't get too comfortable.
Exactly. It's on that edge where we discover what we're truly capable of.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Robert Greene,
It's been a wild ride.
it has. What's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think it's that idea that true fulfillment comes from embracing all of ourselves, the light and the shadow.
We can't just focus on the positive and ignore the parts that make us uncomfortable.
It's about acknowledging our vulnerabilities, our need for connection, our capacity for both love and aggression,
And then channeling all of that into something meaningful.
something that reflects our unique talents and passions.
It's about becoming the authors of our own lives, writing stories that are both deeply personal and universally resonant.
Beautifully said.
So, to our listeners out there, what unexplored territory are you ready to conquer? What hidden potential are you ready to unleash?
The journey might be challenging.
But the rewards are immeasurable.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Until next time.